Hey guys, today I'd like to talk about 3 changes or additions to Death Must Die that I think would improve the overall game experience. So, before we get into the discussion, if you enjoy anything in the video, hit like and subscribe for me. So, let's talk about crafting first. So, this is something that I brought up way back in Act 2, but it seems to be a point of discussion a few people have brought up in recent times as well. At the moment here in Act 3, there are so many different gear affixes in the game that I think some way to curb the RNG a little bit here is starting to feel really, really necessary. For me, I've been playing Act 3 for more than 300 hours now, I think, somewhere around there, and there are just some gear affixes that never roll for me. I've been chasing crit chance stuff for Nixie for a long time. High projectile count stuff for Maris just does not drop for me. And then there's like duration gear on the heavy pieces that I've got a couple, but even then it took me 300 hours to get them. And then there are random stats that I just didn't even know existed, such as what is it? Dash distance on the boots can roll up to like 60% or something. I've seen it obviously before roll at like 15 or 20% or whatever. I did not know it could roll all the way up to 60%. So there are just tons of examples of these sorts of items that I just never see drop for me. Now, RNG is RNG. It's a loot RNG game. I understand that. However, at the moment, there are so many gear affixes. If you're going for a specific build, it's starting to feel really, really hard to actually get what you want for your build. I think that's been a problem ever since Act 3 dropped. However, after playing this much, it's become very, very obvious just how many affixes there are and how many items I have to sift through just to find a couple of items that I really, really actually want for the character build. So, how would they implement crafting? I think the simplest way would just have a crafting bench in the base, and you could re-roll one line on there, one affix for an amount of gold, and it would be randomly rolled. I think that is the simplest way they could introduce it. If they want to go deeper with the crafting system and have crafting ingredients or something like that, they could take that route as well. I think there are two schools of thoughts here. You either go very, very simple, the first solution that I propose, or you make it more in depth and you make it a real deep crafting system. I don't know if this game really warrants a really, really deep crafting system. Maybe it does. Maybe that'd be really, really cool. That would extend the grind and that sort of stuff. But at the moment, there's so many RNG affixes. You really, really need some way to curb the RNG. Number 2, I want to talk about the overall structure of these runs now. So back in Act 1, you can see in the background right here, right now, at minute 4, you got locked in and you had to deal with these slimes, right? Back in Act 2, we had the 4-minute cats. When that first came out, you were locked in and you had to deal with these cats. If you couldn't deal with these crazy laser beams coming at you, you were dead, basically. So nowadays in Act 3, these don't exist anymore. They've been removed, and especially in an era where you can melt bosses really, really quickly, it starts to become just straight 20 minutes of node farming. And I personally think node farming is actually kind of pretty boring after a while. I understand that some movement speed builds can sort of node farm, and that's kind of part of the game. I understand node farming in general is a part of the game. However, if you remove these waves that lock you in, and you have bosses that die in 10 seconds or less, it just becomes 20 minutes of node farming very quickly. And that to me is feeling very repetitive and pretty boring after a while, to be totally honest. I'm kind of getting a little bored of Act 3. I might go back and start doing some Act 1 and Act 2 stuff. Don't get me wrong, we're still going to keep doing some builds and stuff like that, but yeah, I think having these waves that were had like a set challenge for you to overcome is actually more interesting overall. And we had one at 4 minutes, so you had a 7-minute boss, and you had what was it? I think it was a 14-minute boss, and then a 17, or was it like 12 and 14, something like that. It was enough that it broke up the game structure in these runs, that it just didn't feel like we were doing the same thing over and over again. And I think that is something that they need to maybe reconsider or go back to, or I don't know, for Act 4 what they're going to do. It's fine to have some of the acts feeling different from each other in some way, but man, Act 3, it just at the moment, it just feels like 20 minutes of node running, and to me that's starting to get very very samey pretty quickly here at the moment. So now, my last point actually kind of ties into that second point there, and that is the procedural waves. So I think on paper, the idea of procedural waves, it sounds good, right? To have more variety in the waves that are coming at you, and have it be a bit more unpredictable and that sort of thing. Now, on paper, that sounds good. On paper, that sounds like it would make the game less monotonous or less one note or whatever, but I think in reality, it has had kind of the opposite effect. Here in Act 3, I feel like I get basically three waves. A bunch of skeletons running just right at me, a bunch of the green frog goblin-y looking dudes. Sometimes they're blue, but they just run straight at me. And then we get the crowd control spam waves, and I guess maybe an archer wave too. So it feels like there are only like 3 or 4 waves, even though it's procedural. And even though there are 20 minutes of waves, it's starting to feel like a lot of these waves are just the same. And I think that kind of ties back into the other point that I just made, point two. The combination of these two things has started to make the game and the waves in the game feel very, very repetitive. I think that's something they should reconsider. I don't know if procedural waves necessarily are bad, right? The idea of them, I think, as I said before, I think the idea of them is actually pretty good to potentially keep you on your toes and that sort of stuff. But on paper, yeah, in practice, it just doesn't feel like it's landed for me. It feels like it's made the game way more samey from wave to wave, from run to run, and that's actually, I think, the opposite of what they were intending. Now, I'm not necessarily advocating to go back to having set waves, but I do think the way the set waves played out was more fun. It also allowed the developers to tune the difficulty of the waves to be more specific. And it also means that they can sort of balance the gear a bit more around these are the challenges that you need to overcome. So we can tune the end game gear and the affixes a bit more around what the game challenge is. Right now in Act 3, especially in this era where we have really, really powerful builds that can kill the bosses really, really quickly, it starts to feel like I am just node farming for 20 minutes and all of the waves are starting to feel very, very similar. And I don't think that was the goal for procedural waves. So I'd be interested to know where you guys land on this stuff. I think a crafting system, I think, is pretty obvious. I think it's a loot RNG sort of game. You need some way to curb the RNG on these items. So the shop is one thing, but the shop doesn't really cut it because, as I said, I've played more than 300 hours and I'm not getting half of the stat rolls that I've been looking for on these gear pieces. So that really sucks. So I think having some other reasons to either stay in one zone on the map or having you locked in and giving you a specific challenge, I think is really interesting. And I think it's necessary because otherwise node farming for 20 minutes is becoming pretty repetitive too. And it just really encourages you to take a high movement speed, screen clearing sort of build. The one setup that I did was Time Lord Maris, where you can just kind of sit in your bubble, and that's really interesting. But it still pays you to node farm because after a certain point, once your bubble is big enough and strong enough, you can node farm, and the enemies just die anyway. And you're just scooping up the XP. As long as you have some decent pull range, or you come across some magnets along the way, you can just scoop everything up and it's starting to make the game feel pretty similar, pretty one note in its gameplay style, and I think that sort of needs to change. And the other thing is these procedural waves, man. So many of these waves now, they just feel like skeleton spam coming right at you. If it's not the skeletons, it's the frog type enemies, whatever the hell they are. And if it's not that, it is the crowd control, or there are the enemies that charge you down to the knights or whatever they are too. But aside from that, it just, yeah, a lot of these waves are feeling very, very samey. I think if you go back to the original Act 1 and original Act 2 patches, they weren't perfect, sure. Maybe some things could have been changed or whatever, but I think the structure of the actual run felt way more varied and way more interesting. And personally, I kind of liked being able to know what the challenge was, and to sort of learn the encounters and build for them, build around them. Now, I'm not saying procedure waves are necessarily bad, but I think the way they've been implemented here at the moment in Act 3, they're starting to feel pretty samey to me. So guys, let me know what you think with a comment down below. Be interested to know what you think of these sorts of proposals for changes. With that being said, guys, I hope you all have a fantastic, amazing day. We've got another build coming up pretty soon, so enjoy and take it easy.